So I thought people might be interested in this article by Owen Jones. Owen Jones, the gift that just keeps on giving. Tommy Robinson is no martyr to freedom of speech, he says, and starts his article with this statement of intent. Members of the far right, I want you to notice that far right thing because he uses it a lot. Members of the far right are more interested in restricting civil and religious liberties than defending the right to expression. This is what he says is his take on what the Tommy Robinson supporters are doing. So first of all, they're far right, and secondly, they want to restrict civil and religious liberties. Let's have a look at the rest of his article. And by the way, if you notice, Jones gives Robinson's real name. He's not going to let him get away with any anonymity, is he? They are the victimizers who clothe themselves in the garb of victimhood. That's pretty rich coming from a spokesman of the left of the Labour Party, who are constantly complaining about being victims, and who are supporters of Islamists who seem to have made a career out of claiming victimhood, even to the extent of making things up, like people cutting girls' hijabs off and cutting people with swastikas when these are self-inflicted wounds. Okay, well, let's get on with Jones's version of the world. Free speech is their mantra, but it is nothing more than a political ploy, a ruse, a term that the far right willfully abuse to spread hatred. This is pretty good. Free speech is their mantra, but it is nothing more than a political ploy. Now, hang on a minute. We've got here, free speech is their mantra. Who is there? Well, it seems to be anyone who's asking for free speech. We're all the far right, provided we're not on Jones's side. And when we talk about free speech, it's nothing more than a political ploy. So all you people who are interested in free speech should be aware that you're a bunch of hypocrites. And then, you see, he has to use two words, which strikes me as sort of interesting. A political ploy, a ruse. You know, he can't just say a political ploy. He has to strengthen his own argument. My suspicion is strengthen it to himself. Anyway, a term the far right, you see, there's the far right again, willfully abuse. You don't willfully abuse anything. You either abuse or you don't, you know, it's not willfully. He's got to put that in, though. There's a sort of forest of words here to spread hatred. Okay, so free speech isn't only a political ploy, mates, it's also a mechanism for spreading hatred, just so you know. The arrest and jailing for contempt of court of Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, not Tommy Robinson, a name he revealingly took from another football hooligan when he founded the far-right English Defence League, has quickly been mythologized by the international far right as yet more martyrdom. It is victimization of brave truth-tellers. They screech. They, that's me, I suppose, don't explain, don't claim, don't maintain. No, we screech. I admit my voice can be a bit abrasive sometimes, but I've heard others with much more mellifluous voices. They're not screeching. By an establishment at war with Western culture. And in what way can we say that the establishment isn't at war with Western culture? The way it seems to be giving a free pass to Islam recently. I am heavily restricted in what I can write about Yaxley-Lennon. That's because I too could be in contempt of court for fatally undermining the right of people to a fair trial. Look, I've already said in a previous video that I don't think Tommy Robinson did the right thing by getting himself arrested in front of the court. But then you know, and I know, and everybody else knows that Robinson would have been arrested for eating an ice cream in the same town, wouldn't he? They'd have got him for littering or something because they wanted to get him. Yaxley-Lennon already had a suspended sentence and was warned he would go to jail if his behaviour again risked the collapse of a trial. Well, true. He's no martyr to freedom of speech, just a career criminal. Now, a career criminal, definitely not. A roughhouser, yes. I wouldn't call him a career criminal. A history of mortgage fraud. Anyone can go online and find out what that mortgage fraud was, and it was because he was too ready to do a favour for a friend, and it had absolutely no benefit to himself. Football hooliganism, when he was a teenager, and assault, whose craving for publicity put a critical court case at risk. I don't think it was a craving for publicity. Certainly he was trying to get publicity, but it wasn't a craving for personal publicity. It was a craving to get a story in front of the public that was not in front of the public and should have been. And here's the wider point. The obsessive tactical misuse of free speech. What do you mean, misuse of free speech? Apart from the fire in a crowded theatre analogy, there never is any use of free speech that can be called misuse, except by people like Owen Jones. The obsessive tactical misuse of free speech by an ascendant far right. Now he's got to bring in Roseanne Barr, who is apparently far right. Roseanne Barr, a once celebrated US comedian. Hang on a minute. Roseanne Barr is sympathetic to the Trump side of politics, and that makes her far right, doesn't it? A once celebrated US comedian has had her primetime ABC show dropped because of a gratuitously racist tweet. She made a reference to someone called Valerie Jarrett, who, when I looked her up, turned out to have been born in Iran. She is an American citizen. She was born to two American parents. Her father was a head of department at an Iranian hospital for 5 years, I believe. So that could have been missed. It is quite possible that Barr thought she was an Iranian. She was not given the benefit of that doubt. Now, I remember seeing a clip of Oprah Winfrey talking about people who had bad racial attitudes from an older generation, and what she said was something like, "This will only go when all those people just die."
In that prejudice and racism, and they just have to die.
That was a dreadful thing to say. But she was given the benefit of the doubt because it sounded very much like she was asking for these people to die in order for the problem to go away. That is, she wanted them to die. And I'd say that was pretty terrible. And I'd say it was every bit as bad as what Roseanne had said. That is, it could be taken in two ways. And in this case, it was taken the terrible way. And in Winfrey's case, she was given the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so here we are. Alt-right campaigners abound on social media, screeching. There's your screech again. That's the only word he can think of because he doesn't like the sound of their voices. It's not what they're saying. It's the fact that it offends him so deeply he can't hear what they say in any other terms than screeching. On social media, screeching about yet another assault on freedom. Yes, well, any assault on freedom requires some serious conversation. But Barr remains entitled to spray her bigotry across social media and to keep retweeting self-pitying justifications for her behaviour. And ABC is entitled not to give her a show. Yeah, and ABC is also entitled to pull her show simply because they got nervous about her right of centre views. US far-right types such as Richard Spencer. So now Roseanne Barr is in the same category as Richard Spencer, and me come to that. US far-right types such as Richard Spencer hold free speech rallies, while Yaxley-Lennon held a day for freedom in Britain. Okay, so Richard Spencer holds a free speech rally, and then Tommy Robinson, his day for freedom is in the same category, and Richard Spencer is Yaxley-Lennon, and Yaxley-Lennon is Richard Spencer in Owen Jones's mind, or what passes for a mind anyway. When Katie Hopkins, oh, here's another bête noire, if you'll forgive that expression, was fired by a leading radio station, her far-right supporters again construed it as an attack on free speech, as it was. There is a chasm separating the right to free speech and the privilege of being given a platform to make your views known. No one has a right to a platform. Well, actually, they do. People have a right to a platform in places where a platform is required. For instance, Speaker's Corner. Everyone has a right to a platform at Speaker's Corner. Everybody has a right to a platform in a university, because a university is a place where the bazaar of ideas is supposed to take place. If I offer you a megaphone and then take it back off you, you can continue to say what you like, just not with my megaphone. But if your megaphone is public property, Mr. Jones, then anyone has a right to it. It isn't your megaphone. And that's exactly what you seem to think, isn't it? You are the one who decides on who gets the megaphone. The vast majority of people do not have regular TV slots or newspaper columns or radio shows. Well, no, they don't. But that's because these media are not set up to allow just anyone to take charge of them. But now there are other media that do. And you don't seem to be thinking of this. Oh, of course, you're a journalist and you print your stuff in a newspaper that's prepared to give you a platform. So you're all right, Jack, aren't you? In the 17th century, the only way you could get your views across to the general public was by being wealthy enough to pay a printer to typeset broadsheets for you and then to pay urchins to distribute them for you, either at a penny a sheet or for free, depending on how keen you were to get your views across. The point is, that was the original mass communication. Does Owen Jones think that his career as a journalist is thereby invalidated because it reaches more people than the broadsheets did? Or it uses a different technology? This just shows how semi-literate he is about the march of history and the growth in general communications and the exchange of ideas. He just wants to hold everything back to the world he knows, the world of basically 19th century journalism. The vast majority of people do not have regular TV slots. That does not mean their freedom of speech is under assault. No, it doesn't. But when the platforms that they do have are under assault, their free speech is under assault. Yes, I would argue that platforms are not fairly distributed. The vast majority of Britons support renationalisation of utilities, for example. Do they? Or higher taxes on the rich. Oh, I like that. Whom do you define as the rich, by the way, Mr. Jones? I've heard various people giving their ideas of who the rich is, I heard somebody say anyone who gets over £10,000 a year. I heard somebody else say everyone who gets £50,000 a year. I heard somebody else say £100,000 a year. I heard somebody say millionaires. What do you mean, the rich? And in any case, what if, for instance, somebody has been earning a steady low-grade income, never gone away on holiday, never taken holidays, just earned and earned and earned, very rarely goes out, and then has amassed quite a lot of money by the end of his life? Does that make him the rich? And does it give you a right to give him higher taxes because he's lived a very, miserly life? No, it doesn't. And how you define the rich is part of the problem, isn't it, Mr. Jones? Okay, but those opinions are not adequately represented in the media. They're not adequately represented because hardly anybody believes in them except you. But of course, you live in a bubble, don't you? And as you do live in a bubble, you imagine that everybody thinks like you. But that is a separate argument from freedom of expression. Yes, it is. So why did you bring it in here? Because your mind is all over the place. If student unions refuse to provide a platform to those they deem bigots, that is not an attack on freedom of speech. Oh, but it is. Now, student unions may refuse to provide a platform, but the university is obliged to do that. And the student unions have to abide by those decisions. They are simply telling the bigots, you may have the legal right to say things we find offensive or even disgraceful, but that does not mean we are compelled to provide you with the advantage of amplifying such bigotry to our audience. But it does. You don't seem to understand the basics of freedom of speech, do you? It is striking that when bigotry of a far-right figure is verbally challenged, their apologist will screech. Here we have screech again. It's the only word he can use. That freedom of speech is under attack, and it is. And they're not screeching. They are pointing something out to you that is not penetrating your thick skull, Mr. Jones. For the far right, freedom of speech means the right to say hateful things without being challenged. No, it means just the right to say things. And some of them may be hateful and they can be challenged, but they may be said. But those on the far right do not believe in freedom at all. Well, the far right may be, but where does the far right start? You see, anything to the right of you is far right as far as you're concerned. And as far as I'm concerned, I believe in freedom for all. They call for the banning of mosques. Well, I've not heard of that. Banning of burqas. I go for banning of burqas if they cover the face, because Western society is predicated on people seeing your face. Mass deportation of migrants and refugees. Where does all this come from? Clamping down on civil liberties? What? It's civil liberties that are causing people like me to make videos like this. They portray their opponents as traitors. No, you portray your opponents as traitors. Traitors to the workers' cause. A workers' cause you have constructed, by the way. Condemning the likes of Yaxley-Lennon instantly brings threats of violence on social media. I'm sure it does from some people. And you don't get threats of violence on social media from the other side? Oh, yes, you do. Recently, there was a play being advertised in some Welsh theatre or other called something like The Murder of Katie Hopkins. Recent messages I've received include, Owen Jones, you'll get what's coming to you very soon, you prick. Well, the grammar's not good, but that's not half the sort of stuff I've seen being directed at people you would describe as far right, from anti-far agitators. Until one day one of us bumps into you, I can't wait. I hope someone fills your jaw, you little prick. I like the way these people keep calling him a little prick. It shows some people still have a command of descriptive English, don't they? Remember places, traitors' faces, you will pay for crimes. Ad infinitum. Well, you know some Latin, Mr. Jones. They know that the struggles of women, ethnic minorities and LGBTQ, and you've missed out a couple of letters there, Jones, people have shifted attitudes. I don't know what that means really, but you know, he's just brought in women, ethnic minorities and LGBT, whatever. So, you know, that's the ticket you have to show to validate your credentials. Once acceptable prejudice that rationalised overt discrimination and persecution have been driven from the mainstream. Well, yeah, people's minds have changed. That's nothing to do with far right. That's to do with the way society is changing. The cry of free speech is simply a ruse to turn back the clock. What? And in doing so, justify stripping away hard-won rights. Okay, so what you are saying here is that people who criticise the status quo are using that to turn back the clock and will strip away hard-won rights. It's only because people were criticising the status quo that those hard-won rights were won, Jones. Stripping away hard-won rights and freedoms from women and minorities. You see, you've got to get that women and minorities in there. The far right surfs the backlash, claiming that people are oppressed because they are white in societies where minorities are more likely to be in poverty, in low-paid jobs, and underrepresented in politics and the media. Now, let's just unpick this. People are oppressed because they are white in societies, because they are white. I'd say that all those girls who were raped by Muslims, I think 99.9% of the people in those gangs were Muslims. And I'm being very conservative there in that figure. They were white and they were oppressed. The police, the social services, the press, nobody took any notice of them. Okay, and minorities are more likely to be in poverty? Well, new immigrants are often more likely to be in poverty. They tend to lift themselves out of it. Except in some communities, notably the Pakistani Muslim community, where they have formed themselves enclaves, do not learn English, and therefore end up in low-paid jobs. And they frequently don't want to work for non-Muslims as well, so they end up being exploited by their own people. And they are not underrepresented in politics and the media. Maybe 8% Muslims in Britain, and I'm sure there are more Muslims showing up in the media than 8%. It feeds on the grievances of white people who are oppressed and exploited, but not because of their whiteness, but because of their class. You know, class does have something to do with it. And the joke is, people like Tommy Robinson and Count Dankula are definitely on the wrong side of the law because of their class. I'm quite sure of that. But they are the ones who are speaking out. The upper class people are keeping their mouths shut. They're insulated from all the problems of multiculturalism. They can be quite laid back about it. And they will remain so laid back that they'll finally end up laying back and getting fucked. But that's another story. Those in this new far-right wave claim to be at war with the mainstream media, but they are, in part, bastard children of it. What? You are, Jones. They're at war with an attitude that isn't only from the mainstream media, it's coming from social services and politics and even the police, the people who are supposed to be protecting such people. The mainstream press endlessly propagate myths, distortions, half-truths and outright lies about Muslims, immigrants, refugees, LGBTQ people, women and benefit claimants. Yeah, probably some lies and a lot of truth as well. A few years ago, courageous reporter Richard Pepiat resigned from the Daily Star in protest at being asked to write lies about Muslims. Yeah, well, I'll believe quite a lot about the Daily Star, but that doesn't invalidate what's going on anyway. The lies of a newspaper in London can get a bloke's head caved in down an alley in Bradford, he wrote. Yeah, and the lies put about by Muslim apologists can get a bloke's head caved in down an alley in Luton. Polls show Britons drastically overestimate the number of Muslims and immigrants. You know, it's true. I keep saying there might be 8% Muslims in Britain. It might be slightly less. And there is a perception that there are more. But that's because you get a substantial proportion of Muslims who are misbehaving themselves. I don't know how much it is, 20% Muslims in jail, something like that, and immigrants at the level of teenage pregnancies and so forth. You know, the level of teenage pregnancies is a tragedy. It doesn't matter if it was only 5%. It would still be a tragedy, because when a teenage girl gets pregnant, it wrecks her life. And any teenage pregnancy to an unwed girl is a tragedy for herself and her family, whether she knows that and they know that or not. Why? Because of dishonest media coverage. Some of it may be dishonest. Your coverage in this article is dishonest, Mr. Jones. Dishonesty happens. That provides fertile recruitment grounds for the far right. Here we go to the far right again. Look, I'm not far right, and I am criticising you, and I'm criticising this. So that makes me far right in your book, because anybody is far right if they disagree with you. Isn't that so? Let's just debate them and defeat them that way, cry some self-identifying liberals. Yeah, we can't have debate. And intelligent debate which defeats an argument. That's definitely not in Owen Jones's book. He once had a problem with what somebody was saying and ended up just ripping off his microphone and walking out, didn't he?
Owen, genuinely, we're trying to have a civilised conversation. I know you're upset. You're upset,
I am,
and you're
I'm very upset.
I'm quite right. Everyone's upset and angry about this, but storming off a TV set.
Debate is not Owen Jones's strong suit. I spend much of my existence debating with people, and walking out on them as well, who, say, oppose nationalising the railways or raising taxes on the rich. Here we are again, the mantra. Nationalise the railways, raise taxes on the rich. That will answer all our problems. It'll go without a hitch. There's a slogan for you to chant, Owen. These are legitimate perspectives. Bigotry is not. Okay, so what is bigotry, Owen? Because you will define as bigotry anything you want to define as bigotry. It's a nice catch-all word for you, isn't it? To debate bigotry is to legitimise hatred based on lies. No, to debate bigotry is to debate bigotry and to expose hatred based on lies without having to take your word for it, as though it was like any other political perspective. Well, I'm afraid it is. To agree or disagree with as you see fit. Yes, it is. Not to agree or disagree, but to expose the logical inconsistencies. And you can't do that when you don't allow free speech. Tim Poole made a point, and I was actually standing next to him while this was going on. Somebody, I don't know who it was, but somebody was talking to him about, it was probably Richard Spencer, saying something pretty awful. Tim Poole said that Spencer had said something pretty awful, whatever it was, and this guy said no, he never said any such thing. So Tim Poole got out his smartphone and started surfing the web to get that quote, and he couldn't find it. And then he realised that because of EU restrictions on what can be put out on the internet, that Richard Spencer quote was not available to people looking for Richard Spencer quotes in Britain. So Richard Spencer had got a free pass simply because the more objectionable of what he says is being filtered out. That's what happens when you restrict free speech. We know where radicalisation can lead. Oh yes, we do, but you're not talking about it, are you? Radicalisation in Britain mostly is Muslim radicalisation. You're not saying that, are you? You're talking about far-right radicalisation, which can happen, but mostly in response to Muslim radicalisation, we have to say. There are the hate crimes that happen in our communities and streets every day. Well, what do you mean every day? Then there is the murder of Joe Cox, the MP, by Thomas Mayer, a neo-Nazi terrorist. As far as I remember, she got murdered only once, and since then, I don't think many MPs have actually been murdered, I may be wrong about that, by any far-right neo-Nazis or whatever. Darren Osborne, a terrorist who ploughed his van into a mosque. Now, hang on. Let's see how many Muslims have ploughed their vans into people. I'd say Darren Osborne was not exactly one of the most common examples of his type. He was partly radicalised by far-right social media, and maybe he was. Anders Breivik, a Norwegian neo-Nazi. So now we've got to go to Norway to get an example. He did a terrible thing, a really terrible thing, because of the far-right trope that the left were accomplices in the Islamisation of Europe. Actually, I'm afraid the left are accomplices in the Islamisation of Europe. They are. But that's no excuse, of course, for killing kids. However, it's no excuse for blowing yourself up in a crowd of teenagers coming out of a concert. You've got to go all over the place to find the non-Muslims. I know you're not mentioning Muslims here, Jones, but that's what we're all thinking of, isn't it? The far right has always embraced the discourse of victimhood and persecution. Who is the far right, Jones? And when we're talking about victimhood and persecution, I don't think it can be outdone by people of your kidney. Its cynical embrace of free speech, well, there's cynical again. Free speech, it's just a ploy, isn't it? Is a dishonest ruse. Well, we've got that ruse word again. To propagate hatred, there's the use of the word hatred again, nothing more. If it managed to seize power, it would swiftly strip away. We've had that strip a couple of times, haven't we? The rights and freedoms of those it deemed treacherous opponents. There's your treachery again. As if the left isn't very keen to do that. You know, I was once told by actually a Jamaican fellow, this might be a Jamaican expression, if you're pointing your finger at somebody, you have 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. I always thought that was rather good. Freedom of speech is precious indeed. Yeah, hang on. Here comes the but. Because on the left you say, I believe in freedom of speech, but freedom of speech is precious indeed. Just don't be deceived by a resurgent far right. There's that far right again. For which it is a rhetorical device to attack democracy and nothing more. And your rhetoric, Jones? Okay, Owen Jones is a Guardian columnist. I don't know why, but suddenly the word pancakes keeps running through my mind. But I'm too much of a lady to refer to any man as a tosser.